Okay, welcome everybody to the November 13th Sandag Transportation Committee. I'm Vice Chair Bill Sankey, trying to fill the big flight boots of Supervisor Desmond, who is not able to be with us today. We'll begin today's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And next, I'll ask our clerk to confirm that we have a quorum.
Yes, Vice Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. I'd like to remind the members and the public on our process for both member and public comments. The primary members will be using their cameras and will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment to make, or if I'm missing seeing your face on the screen, please use your microphone and bring it to my attention, and we'll get you recognized. And now I'll ask our legal counsel to provide a quick reminder on how the public comments for today's meeting will work. Amber Lynn, take it away.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Call for an item, please click on the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar on the top right of the screen. The clerk will call on you by the name you have provided. If you are participating by telephone, please press *9 on your telephone, which will raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak. The clerk will call on you by the last 3 digits of the telephone number. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be accessed from the homepage of the website at www.sandag.org. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Amberlyn. And remember, all comments, whether emailed live, will be made part of today's meeting record. Everything sound good for everybody? Let's get this thing rolling. Item number 1, approval of the meeting minutes. I'd ask for any corrections, de minimis corrections or changes from committee members. If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
McNamara so moved.
McNamara motion. May I have a second, please?
Ward second.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ward. And let's go ahead and do that roll call vote.
Thank you very much. For the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, Joanna Schiavone.
Schiavone, yes.
Thank you. For the City of San Diego, Councilmember Ward.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't believe we have a member present for the County of San Diego, but just in case, Supervisor Greg Cox, are you on? I don't believe so, so I'll mark them as absent. For East County, Councilmember Mendoza?
Yes.
Thank you. For MTS, Mayor Sotelo Solis? I believe she is absent as well. For North County Coastal, Mayor Edson?
Yes.
Thank you. For North County Inland, Mayor McNamara?
McNamara, yes.
Thank you. For North County Transit District, Deputy Mayor Feller? I believe he is absent as well. For the Port of San Diego, Commissioner Benelli?
Benelli, yes.
Thank you. And for South County, Vice Chair Sankey?
Sankey, yes.
Thank you very much. And that does pass with 3 absences.
Okay, thank you very much. On to number 2, public comments. Do we have any public comments?
Vice Chair, I don't see any hands raised from the public.
Okay, I'm going to kick off the member comments with a congratulatory message to Council Member and now Assembly Member-elect Chris Ward. Chris, you and I were on the call yesterday for MTS, and I apologize for not taking a second and saying how proud our region is of you and how we look forward to you representing the interests of our region in Sacramento. Congratulations.
Thank you, Bill. I look forward to helping you with both Coronado's interests and Sandag's interests. It's really an honor always to have been elected, and we got a lot of work ahead of us. So I'll do that in partnership with everybody.
And I know you've already building your team because I can hear little voices in the background. So you're going to be a great addition to this team up there. Are there any other member comments for today? Okay. Hearing none. Moving on. Great.
Vice Chair, thank you.
I'm sorry. Pause me. Gustavo, please.
Yeah, sorry, Vice Chair Sankey. I have 3 announcements that I wanted to make very briefly. The first one has to do with the fact that this is National Traffic Incident Response Awareness Week. And what we're trying to do is to raise the public's attention to the fact that when there's an incident on the road and they see emergency responders, they need to slow down and move over to protect our emergency responders. We got too many people out on our public roads thinking or looking at their social media, and we need to have them keep their eyes on the road and watch out for our emergency responders. The second thing that I wanted to mention is that yesterday Caltrans announced that we will start issuing temporary permits, allowing restaurants and other businesses to operate on the highway where the highways become main streets. This is in response to Governor Newsom's executive order on October 28th, executive order number 8320, which allows this type of activity to happen for at least the next 120 days. Caltrans will be issuing the encroachment permits to the cities or the county, and also federal highways will be involved in the issuance of those permits or the approval of those permits. Then the cities or the counties, after they apply and get those permits, then they will work with individual business owners within their city or the county to operate in the approved areas. And the last announcement that I wanted to make is on October 9th, Caltrans mentioned that we're looking for up to 150 volunteers for continued research on a road user charge program as an alternative to the gas tax. This would build up where a 2017 study left off, and we'll continue exploring other opportunities to get funding for transportation as an alternative to the gas tax. So that concludes my announcements. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Gustavo, and for continuing to partner both with the port on the lighting project and the state legislature on the suicide prevention efforts for the Coronado Bridge. I salute you and your team, and continue to stay engaged in that. We do the whole region a favor to stay on top of that. And for my business avenue friends on Orange Avenue, which is also Highway 75, we might have gotten just a little ahead of your permit process because we're using those sidewalks quite regularly, and it's all quite safe. And we look forward to working with you guys as we come up with more innovative ways to keep our businesses open and successful as we move to the purple tier.
Thank you.
You bet, Gustavo. Any other member comments? I'm going to call that a no. Francesca, anybody else? No? All right. Moving on to, thank you very much, Francesca. Moving on to number 3, Hassan Akrada is going to give the executive director's report. Hassan, great to see you again. Get us up to date.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Assembly Member-elect Ward, congratulations. We're happy that you're going to be in Sacramento watching for us. We have a couple of bills being drafted for you. We didn't ask your opinion, but I'm sure you're going to like them. Thank you. Good morning to all of you. A couple of updates. First, on the audit plan. Today, the draft action plan will go to the audit committee at 12:30. The audit plan is a joint effort by management and the independent auditor's office. Here I would like to thank Mary Kay and her staff for truly being partners and working with us on this. Today we'll go to the audit committee. The audit committee will make a recommendation, then we'll go to the board on November 20th. As you know, we are in purple zone, and there is things that affect us directly. We were planning tours to the border, to the Del Mar Bluff with the almost completing phase 4 work, to Mid-Coast, which now called the San Diego, the UC San Diego Blue Line Trolley. Those tours will be temporarily suspended because of the advisory on COVID-19 and because we want to make sure everybody is safe. But we will continue them afterward. Many requests from our elected leaders to do these tours. We have been doing them for the last few months. there really is important to go see the kind of project we talk about. But those tours will be on hold for a while until we hopefully get out of the purple zone. As I told you previously, the agency have 5 priorities. The first one is the regional transportation plan, the 5 big moves. We presented to you a few months ago to the board. I'm really proud of the team. They have just done an amazing job presenting the vision. And now we're working to move from a vision to a plan that we're gonna release in a draft form in April of next year, in a few months. Well, happy to report to you that last week, myself and Ray Major and Colina Clemenson have presented this plan to 3 joint state agencies: the California Transportation Committee, the Air Resources Board, and the Housing and Community Development Department. They had a joint meeting. We presented our 5 big moves. And I'm happy to report to you that the comments that we received back is make this a statewide effort. Let San Diego and Sandag lead this to be a way to move forward, where you add capacity without adding vehicle mile travel, where you have your plan driven by data and facts, not by desires, and make sure that the data that we collect is data that we can stand by. Great interest on the part of the state and all these agencies to partner with us, but you can assure that Sandag and San Diego is leading the state when it comes to thinking of a sustainable future for our regions. I couldn't be prouder of the team. They're still working and crunching data, and very shortly, sometimes next month, we'll be presenting to this committee hopefully some ideas of the benefit that this vision will do. So the first priority of the agency is moving well forward and becoming a state and national example of how regions move forward. The second priority, it's the Del Mar Bluff stabilization. We're finishing Bluff 4. We have applied for Bluff 5 money from the state. Monday, actually, the California Transportation Commission will be making recommendations on 2 projects that we have. One is for Otay Mesa 2, and the other is the Del Mar Bluff. We don't know whether the state is going to fund both or one of them. I hope at least one of them will be funded, and we will know that next Monday. But we're serious about stabilizing the bluff. At the same time, reminding all of you that stabilizing the bluff is a temporary solution. And we cannot be going forever doing a temporary fix. You can fight nature, but nature at the end will win. And therefore, we're starting the corridor study that looks at long-term solution for the bluff, which definitely will involve moving the bluff inland for about 1.5 miles by Del Mar. And yes, it's going to be expensive, and yes, it's going to be hard, and yes, it's most likely going to be underground. But the region cannot gamble with this important corridor for people and goods. That's the second priority, is moving forward. The third priority, Otay Mesa 2, we held several discussions with our partners from Mexico. I have spoken to our ambassador in Mexico City, the Mexican ambassador in Washington, D.C. from Mexico to the U.S. We have just communicated with the Secretary of Transportation and Communication, with Secretary David Kim. All lead to, there is a movement in the Mexican side. Our goal is to build this facility, Otay 2, by September 2024, which means we're going to have to cut the ground sometimes in 2022. So that's the priorities moving forward, the fourth priority, and we think we're going to get there. And the fifth priority is to build the big data and open data. And Ray Major will tell you that we're going to invest resources. Obviously, the momentum got shut down a little bit by COVID, but we're going to get back to that priority. Mr. Chairman, these are my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
So as a leader of our organization, one of the things that I admire most about you is how much credit you give to your team. Once again, I'll do the same on behalf of the committee. It is a great work product that we're seeing month after month on this 5 big moves and other parts of the corridor planning that's going on. So kudos to you. One quick question on the Del Mar Bluffs. You mentioned this in one of your reports a month or so ago that the Coastal Commission were presenting a little bit of a problem to us in terms of making progress on, I don't know if it's number 4 or number 5 in terms of phases, but how are we doing on that?
First of all, the Coastal Commission has been a great partner and continue to be a great partner. What I was talking about is there were some feud between the Coastal Commission and North County Transit.
Thank you very much.
Where the board of North County Transit filed a petition to the Transportation Board to bypass the Coastal Commission pretty much and build a fence on the track by Del Mar. My message was filing petitions and going to court is not going to solve problems. We've been a great partner with the Coastal Commission. We would like to continue to be because we would need them for all the work on 5 and 6, etc. So I was urging the North County Transit to cool down, and luckily, and I'm grateful, the board of North County Transit took an action to suspend for 120 days to allow discussion between NCTD and the Coastal Commission. So far, so good. But again, I will always stand by the fact that the Coastal Commission has been a great partner, that if we resort to court and laws, we will lose as a region, and we need to put the region's interest first, not our little things here and there. So that was my comment last week.
Okay.
This week is better. I'm grateful that they suspended for 120 days at least to allow us to talk to the Coastal Commission.
Thanks for getting us up to date on that one. And I apologize for mixing up the Bluff project with the NCTD fence issue. Are there any other questions for Hassan from committee members? Okay, and are there any public comments on this issue?
No, I don't see any hands raised from the public.
Thank you, Francesca. Okay, moving on to reports. Item number 4 is an update on the Coast, Canyons, and Trails Comprehensive Multimodal Corridor Plan, previously known as C to Santee, I think. And I'm interested to hear how the name change happened too, because I kind of like that other one. All right, go ahead. Karen, I believe you're going to help us with this one, and Rachel Kennedy as well.
Yes, good morning, Chair. My name is Rachel Kennedy, and I'm the Sandag Corridor Planning Manager. And our team here is happy today to provide the Transportation Committee with an update on the Coast, Canyons, and Trails, CMCP. As you may all remember, in September 2019, the Board of Directors allocated $40 million to fund comprehensive multimodal corridor studies for all of the major corridors in the region. And these plans will look at multimodal transportation solutions, which build on the complete corridors concept, which is being considered as one of your 5 big moves in the regional plan. And as we look at the transportation improvements in these corridors, we'll be looking at all modes, transit, highway, local streets and roads, active transportation, as well as the supporting land uses, mobility hubs, and technology components needed to make all of those different elements operate smoothly together. At your October meeting, you received a presentation on the South Bay to Sorrento corridor. And can I have the next slide, please? And that was the corridor shown in purple on the map here. And today, staff is going to be sharing information with you on the Coast, Canyons, and Trails CMCP, which is shown on green on this map here. The Coast, Canyons, and Trails corridor includes State Route 52, portions of State Route 67, and their connections with Interstate 5, State Route 163, Interstate 15, and State Route 125. The corridor also includes the Green Line and Orange Line trolley and multiple bus lines, as well as local arterials. Today, the Caltrans Central Corridor's Project Director, Karen Jewell, is here, and she's going to be providing you with an update on some projects that are recent or ongoing in the corridor. And then we'll be turning it over to Brooke Emery, the project manager with Caltrans. She's a senior transportation engineer, and her co-project manager, Alex Estrella from Sandag, who is our technology planning manager. And they're going to be providing you with some information on the characteristics of this corridor study area. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Karen.
Good morning. Go ahead and next slide, please. So 52 corridor and 67 corridor is basically an east-west corridor facility. It goes from La Jolla all the way to Santee, Lakeside, and El Cajon. And it's a 4- and 6-lane facility throughout the route. You can see the yellow is the 4-lane sections, and the red portions are the 6-lane sections of the freeway. There's also, if you see that green stripe in the middle, that is an existing bike path that goes from Santo Road to Mast Boulevard, and it's located on the north side of the freeway. And this route goes through quite a few different terrains. It goes through a couple of different parks. You've got Marion Berry Park, as well as Mission Trails Park. You've got the ocean at La Jolla, and then you go all the way to East County, and it's an east-west link for our East County folks to get inland to other routes. Next slide, please. So the construction of the route actually started back in the early 60s, and both ends were built first, and then it was started from the west end and moved east and finished up in 2011 with the full construction of the freeway. Next slide. Some of the current projects that are ongoing right now is from the Caltrans SHOP program, which is the State Highway Operations and Protection Program. And this one in particular is basically from about 805 to Santo Road. It's going to add an auxiliary lane from in the eastbound direction from I-15 to Santo Road to help with that merge from the freeway connectors coming on to 15 in the eastbound direction. It's also going to do some median barrier and guardrail upgrades between 805 and 15. We've got some ramp metering work in there, and as well as some ITS elements that are going to be improvements, the electronic improvements on the facility. Next slide. So there's also a 52 operational project that's ongoing. It's in the environmental phase for this project. It's going to add a truck lane between Mast Boulevard and Santo Road in the westbound direction, excuse me. And it's going to relocate that bike path that I explained earlier to the south side of the roadway and build a new bike path, full standard on that side for two-way direction for the bikes, and kind of repurpose the existing bike path to a truck lane in the westbound direction to get up that hill. I know the terrain in the area is difficult for a lot of the vehicles, so there's a lot of varying speeds going up that hill, and this project will help with that with this truck lane. And potentially it will restripe the San Diego River Bridge to 3 lanes. The other thing I do want to mention also at the other end, at the east end, is the Bradley interchange at 67. That project is also an ongoing project with the city of El Cajon. Next slide. So some existing projects that just completed this year. There was also another rehabilitation project. And if you can see the picture on the left, that one is at the off ramps at Kearney Villa, but it did a rehab of a number of the off ramps pavement projects. We also had some guardrail improvement projects that were just completed, as well as some median erosion rehab.
Vice Chair Sankey, this is production. I think we may have lost her.
Okay. I know Brenda's ready to give some stuff. How many more slides does she have on her deck?
This is Brooke Emery. I can take over from here if you'd like.
Yeah, please do, Brooke. Thank you.
Sure. Next slide, please. So the corridor plan will take into account federal, state, regional, and local goals and guidelines to develop a vision for the Coast Canyons and Trails corridor. And from it, we'll recommend projects that help achieve that vision. So these projects will be comprehensive and designed to interconnect the modes. Next slide, please. We have been meeting regularly with our local partners. This includes partners such as the City of Santee, City of El Cajon, City of San Diego, County of San Diego, the San Diego Metropolitan Transit System, the Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, and the San Diego Bike Coalition. Next slide, please. We will be reaching out to our local community groups, the parks, and environmental groups, and encouraging their input to help with the development of the plan. Next slide, please. Our approach is similar to other comprehensive multimodal corridor plans in the region, where we are taking a 4-step approach. The first couple of steps is data collection and understanding and identifying what are the drivers that shape people's travel in the corridor, where they're trying to go, be it work, home, or recreation, developing the study boundary, and identifying and analyzing deficiencies and opportunities. This is where we are now. Later, we will be incorporating alternatives and strategies to see how we can improve mobility in this corridor and check these against the policies and considerations. At the end, we should have a vision with that phase plan for the entire system of improvement. Next slide, please. I would like to now turn the presentation over to my colleague and SANDAG Technology Planning Manager, Alex Estrella.
Well, thank you, Brooke. So as part of the development process, as noted by Brooke, I'm just going to share a number of slides that walk through some of the documentation of this existing data, really to provide insight on and trying to understand some of the key corridor characteristics. So I'm going to start with a number of slides that speak to some socioeconomic data, then followed by some travel-related information. But what you see here first is the study area, the CMCP boundary area. There you go, thank you. Noted in the blue highlight that extends from La Jolla at the I-15 junction, continuing east through the city of San Diego, traversing through the communities of University City, Claremont Mesa, Kearney Mesa, Terrasana, before proceeding through the Mission Trails Regional Park and terminating in Santee. And as mentioned by Karen, this area also includes portions of the State Route 67 in El Cajon. Now, superimposed of the study area is what we call the area influence, noted by the orange highlight. We recognize that the performance and overall travel characteristics is largely influenced and linked to what's happening beyond the corridor boundary. So as Brooke mentioned, as we start developing strategies, we're going to analyze a lot of data coming from this area. This analysis will consider transportation data within that area of influence. Next slide, please. So here are some key statistics that show the area of influence that has grown since 2000. Noted here is that the largest rate of increase is on the number of jobs, up to 22% since 2000. So this is a major factor in revealing a key corridor characteristics that really that corridor serves and reflects a critical east-west commuting travel corridor to employment centers that are likely continue to increase within the Sorrento Valley and Kearney Mesa areas. And this level of information and the assessment that we're going to be undertaking will be important as we develop new mobility alternatives to get people to those jobs. Next slide, please. So in terms of housing, one point to note is that the majority of the area within the boundary is within the MCAS Miramar and the Mission Trails Regional Park. And the largest housing density levels are at the west and southeast ends of the corridor, as you can see here. And as you can see, there's a large void of housing north of State Route 52 and to some extent also on the south side of the corridor due to the Mission Trails Regional Park. So this area influence consists of approximately about 9% of the total housing in the region. And as you can see, as I stated earlier, it's mostly located on the western and eastern portions of the corridor. Next slide, please. Now, the study area does include populations of concern, including seniors, low income, and minority populations. However, the values reflect and mirror the housing density levels or within the boundary, where most is located on the western and eastern portions of the corridor, as you can see here. Next slide, please. Now I would just like to break down some additional corridor characteristics, but related to travel along the corridor, and first starting from the key corridor destinations. As you can see here, the corridor expands across the number of diverse communities, providing connections to a number of key destinations. On the western side, or terminus, you can see the university community, University City community, University of California, and some commercial centers such as the University Town Center, and other key destinations, including some recreational or landmarks, including La Jolla Shores, Mount Soledad, Mission Trails Parks, and Santee Lakes in the Gillespie Field on the eastern portion of the corridor. Next slide, please. Now, taking a deeper dive on the employment centers, there's two employment centers in the corridor study area. And tier 1 employments, which consist of over 75,000 employees on this tier 1, and those include the Sorrento Valley and Kearney Mesa employment centers. We also have some tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 on the eastern portions within the cities of Santee and El Cajon. Obviously, there's limited employment centers other than the MCAs on the northern part of the corridor. But we also have some other employment centers along the I-8, along Claremont Mesa and Mission Gorge of the southern parallel routes that will be examined. Next slide, please. Now here is a slide that illustrates how travel along those employment centers can affect travel, and shown by the numbers of average daily traffic trips, where 36%, just over 1/3 of the vehicles traveling over the Mission Trail Summit are commuting to those employment centers, Sorrento Valley and Kearney Mesa employment centers. Next slide, please. And here we have the existing transit network within the study area. As you can see here, the regional transit options are extremely limited. Only the green trolley line provides kind of the nearest major service paralleling the State Route 52 on the southern side. But additional transit services are also included, BRT services off the I-15 that pass through the study area, and these transit services that provide a north and south connection from the central inland communities to downtown San Diego and to the Kearney Mesa locations. Next slide, please. So this map really helps us illustrate the major points of congestion along the corridor. The corridor experiences heavy congestion between the I-15 and Mass Boulevard during the afternoon peak periods in the eastbound direction. I think there's an animation here. Can you just click on the animation, please? Yeah, leave it there. Thank you. And between Cuyamaca Street and Summit during the AM morning commute periods in the westbound direction, as you can see here, really the westbound, those are the congestion points for folks traveling in the morning to downtown San Diego. And then you also have some morning long, some commute congestion in the morning that spills into State Route 52 as noted here on the 805. And then again, in the afternoon peak periods, you have eastbound congestion on east of the I-15 along the Mission Trails. And really another point here is that between 805 and I-15, due to vehicles trying to merge into those freeways, to those major north-south routes, we also have congestion as noted here. Next slide, please. Taking a little deeper dive into sort of the commuting characteristics, what you see here in these two graphs is the typical travel times. On the top graph, what you see here is the folks that are traveling in the eastbound for afternoon commute periods. You could see here sort of the baseline or the flat line there is generally it takes about 15 minutes to travel in the afternoon peak period. But then during the peak period, which is between about 3 to 5 o'clock, then you see a huge jump in travel times, up to 35 minutes. And again, this is the afternoon traveling eastbound. And then the bottom graph is similar, but it's traveled during the morning commute period. As you could see, the average travel times during free flow speeds, it's approximately about 15 minutes as well, but then during the peak periods jumps to almost 25 up to 30 minutes. Next slide, please. Here's another travel characteristics that reflects the performance of the corridor, and this is mainly for the AM commute period. So from a regional perspective, the corridor connects major north-south freeways. As you can see here, for example, as illustrated, folks that are traveling the I-15, sorry, in the State Route 52, but when they reach that junction I-15, approximately 40% of that travel proceeds on the I-15. And as you proceed westerly, you have between 41 all the way up to 61% that has an influence on the corridor, State Route 52. Now, because these travel characteristics, we do recognize that there's dependencies where the performance of the north-south corridors influence or vice versa with the State Route 52 corridor. So we'll be coordinating very closely with the South Bay to Sorrento CNCP team, really to determine and ensure that the proposed transportation solutions that we'll be developing are considered holistically, and the corridor performance and the analysis within these key junction points are not just treated in isolation, but rather as a comprehensive and integrated network. Now I'll just turn it back to Brooke, who will talk us through some initial assessment of the corridor opportunities.
Sure, thank you, Alex. Next slide, please. So key challenges and deficiencies in the corridor we have already identified include that lack of competitive options or other mode uses on the corridor, gaps in active transportation facilities, steep terrain, and like Alex mentioned, there are limited parallel routes. Next slide, please. Example opportunities within this corridor include the potential to develop transit on the route, active transportation connectivity, operational improvements for connections to the interstates, first and last mile solutions, and smart elements. Next slide, please. Moving forward, we have a number of activities that will be going on over the next 6 to 9 months here. We will be bringing on our consultant, engaging the public over a number of social media platforms, and soon be collecting public input on barriers and opportunities they see within the corridor. And we will be looking to have a final corridor plan by the fall of 2021. Next slide, please. So this wraps up our presentation. We are happy to answer any questions you or the committee members may have. You had mentioned you liked the Sea to Santee name. We actually had some feedback that since it really wasn't the sea, it was the ocean, and the corridor limits extended past Santee, that maybe a new name was appropriate, and that's where we came up with Coast Canyons and Trails. But I'd like to now turn it back over to you, Vice Chair.
Brooke, thank you so very much, and to Alex and Karen and Rachel. Karen, did we get you back? I hope everything's okay.
Yes, I'm back.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so let me reach out to our committee, excuse me, to the public first. Do we have any public comments on this particular presentation? Raise your hand at this time if you've got comments. We'd love to hear from you.
I don't see any hands raised, Vice Chair.
Okay, let's roll it to the committee then. Any member comments? Oh my goodness. All right. I have a couple notes I made here. One, oh, I'm sorry, somebody?
Oh, yeah, Vice Chair, this is Gustavo Dalarda from
Gustavo, please, go ahead.
Yes, if I can just mention, just briefly, first to thank Karen, Alex, and Brooke for the presentation. Brooke, you did also an excellent job taking over when we had some technical difficulties and we lost Karen. I believe when Karen was, when she dropped out, she was talking about our project to correct the dips. So I just want to mention a couple of things. That project is almost 75% done. We will be paving the area where we've been doing the compaction grouting over the next 10 days or so. So most of the work is going to be done by the end of the month. We've been working round the clock, 6 days a week, doing compaction grouting, doing dig outs, and correcting the profile grade. I know it rides a little bit rough right now, but again, there's another layer of pavement that is going to be overlaid in the next few days. Then it's going to be a lot smoother. So this is the biggest investment we've ever done on the dips. As you all know, that area was built over a landfill, And after a period of time, these dips create and they pose a safety issue for traffic. But this time we've gone a lot deeper than just the surface of the pavement. We've done a lot of drilling and a lot of compaction grouting. Hopefully that'll help stabilize that area for much longer than it has in the past. That's all I want to mention. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gustavo. One of the interesting things about this corridor is that there's work going on between the SHOP program and also the of course, the dip correction that you just presented. And so that's really something that the public can see something happening. I was going to mention that involving Santee and Miramar Air Station in your planning is significantly important because on the military side, I think they don't always get the right attention. And then secondly, when Santee working independently to create some bottleneck corrections and looking for some federal funding, we know that particular jurisdiction is extremely concerned about the area. So involving them is really important. I think the environmental gains that we might be getting through this area were explained nicely with the movement of the bike path and some other trail improvements that might happen in the area. It's sort of semi-rural as you go through there anyway, especially with Mission Trails Park and the other parks that you mentioned. So getting some environmental wins out of this, some active transportation wins out of this corridor seems to be a direction you're going, which is great. Since the 52 offers so little in way of transit, we're using at MTS some bus on shoulder innovation for some of the more crowded corridors so that people riding the bus can actually go faster than the cars on the. So I'd urge you to consider bus on shoulder through that particular region if we do get a east-west BRT going or any of for the other regular lines that run through there. I do have one question. I'm not sure who would be the best to answer this. At Sandag and at the Transportation Committee, we've heard for years now from a great group of folks who've come together to provide fire awareness for us at the decision-making level for the folks along the 67. And I'm curious, because part of this corridor does include the 67, I'm wondering what type of fire safety or other emergency planning is going into some of this corridor planning. And I'm not sure who would be the right person to answer that question.
Well, I can go ahead and try and answer that. So we are in close coordination with the 67 CMCP, which is doing an extensive study on that subject. And so we'll be coordinating how they're linking in, because this study is going to go through the freeway portion of 67, and that study will take the highway portion as it goes north.
Got it. Okay. It's nice that it's being addressed. And Gustavo, did you want to add something?
In addition to what Karen said, so we have two efforts going on regarding an emergency operation. One is an independent corridor management plan that is coordinating also with 52, but we also have an environmental document proceeding for 67. And we're looking at filing the notice of preparation for that environmental document sometime early next year, at the beginning of 2021. And one of the main need and purposes for that project will be to consider emergency evacuation for the rural areas.
Great. I'm really pleased that's getting the attention it needs. And one number that came up during the presentation was the 106,000 vehicles that go over the Mission Summit every day. That happens to mirror very closely the number of cars that go back and forth over the Coronado Bridge every day. So to put that in perspective, that's a lot of cars. Okay, well, unless there's any other member comments, going once, going twice. All right, we'll call. Okay, thank you. And again, Karen, Brooke, and Alex, and also whoever I've just forgotten. Thank you so much for your report this morning. As Rachel, yes, and let's get on to our next agenda item.
Vice Chair, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Stuart Halpern has his hand raised.
I would love to hear from Stuart. Stuart, go ahead and let us know what you got to say.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Hear you loud and clear.
Great. Just on the point you raised, speaking as a member of the ITOC, you all know that the ITOC does a triennial performance audit, and one of the topics that we've asked the auditors to look into as part of this coming triennial performance audit specifically is the evacuation and safety aspects of the network, and particularly the areas that you just highlighted. So I just wanted to let you know that the ITOC consultant doing the audit is working on that, and any board members who want to provide feedback or have a chat with the consultant, they're eager to hear from you.
Stuart, thank you very much for your years of service on iTalk, and it's great to hear your voice. Thanks for participating with us today. Appreciate those comments. Okay, moving on to item number 5. It's the TransNet Major Corridors Program short-term funding needs and considerations. So for the education of most of the committee members, I don't need to tell you this, but you know this has been coming for a while. And at the board level, we've had these discussions for the last several years from the finance folks that at some point along the line, we're going to run into a cash flow shortage in terms of short-term spending needs. The folks in the finance side have taken a close look at some opportunities that we may have. There'll be some strategies in this particular presentation today that we can consider. We may make a recommendation to the board in terms of the ones that we favor, but whatever happens at our level will go to the board either with our comments or with comments and a motion that has that reflects our preferences. So I'm hoping that you'll pay close attention to the options we're being given and then provide some feedback in terms of the things that you think would make the most difference for our organization, especially as the short-term funding needs are being addressed. So I believe I'm kicking it off to Ray Major, according to my notes, and if I'm not, then correct me.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Ray.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for having me and letting me present a little bit about what's happening with our forecast. Can we have the next slide, please? One of the things that I wanted to talk about is why we haven't come up with our short-term forecast this year. And I think you can probably guess it has to do with COVID and everything that is happening around that, and kind of what our plans are to come up with a new forecast. So in terms of the data collection for the taxable retail sales, it's been extremely volatile during this COVID period. And so that makes it difficult for us to really come out with some solid numbers that we can really rely on. We also need to consider the length and the severity of the economic disruption. And we don't know how long this is going to last. If you remember back in March, when we first closed down, we thought it was going to be 2 weeks. Some people then thought it was going to be 6 weeks. And now we're into 8 or 9 months. And we really don't know how long this disruption is going to happen. So we need to get a better handle on that. The other thing is that federal and state stimulus really does add a lot of uncertainty to the forecast. And this has to do with the fact that trillions of dollars come into the national economy. A lot of that trickles into San Diego, and it actually supports taxable retail sales. And as I'll share with you later on, it's been good for sales tax revenue because people have been spending it on things that are taxable. And we also have issues with the state of California payments. They're very unpredictable. Some of this has to do with legislation that was passed because of COVID, where if businesses were going to pay, or they estimated to pay less than $50,000 a year in sales tax revenue, they allowed them to defer that during the COVID time. So those payments weren't coming in early on in the crisis. And then there were accounting issues too that have to do with software. So we really needed to wait for some more data to come in before we could really draw a forecast that we could feel confident in. We only had data available for the Q1, which only included 2 weeks of COVID. And you can imagine how volatile things have been in April, May, June, July, August, for instance. And trying to understand what's happening, we needed to collect some real data. So on November 12th, which was yesterday, we got our first indication in terms of what the sales tax revenue might be for that first quarter of actual economic shutdown. And it looks relatively good, but we really need to wait until the end of the month when the state of California actually gives us our payments so that we know where we're at. Next slide, please. There have been significant issues in the last couple of years with the data that we've gotten from the state of California. And some of this has to do with the State Board of Equalization becoming the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration with the new CDTFA. There's a new software system that they implemented. And as you can imagine, with any software system, there are issues. And through 2018 and 2019, There were all sorts of issues with people being able to file on time. And so there were payments that were made late. And so they needed to be adjusted for in our revenue numbers. So lots of issues happening in the first couple of years of this. And then as of October 1st, the Wayfair decision, which allows the state of California to now collect taxes from online retailers, which we knew we were losing money there because many of the online retailers weren't paying taxes on small purchases or businesses that they would represent that were located in other states. They now all have to pay taxes. So that was going to be a windfall to us. And we now are starting to see some of that come in. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And so lots of things happening in terms of the data series. Next slide, please. This is just to kind of give you an indication of what the sales tax revenue has looked like in the past. If you look at the percentage line, I think it's the easiest to compare. And you can see that between 2013 and 2017, we really didn't need to make any adjustments, and things were pretty much what we were getting from the state was what we believed we were getting. And so, things were in alignment. But then in 2018, you can see things started to go awry a little bit. And that's because in 2018, there were deferred payments to the state due to some software issues that didn't come in until 2019. So we had to make adjustments for that, move some of that revenue to 2018. So you can see that the two lines start to diverge from there. And going out here to the projected year, our projection was that we would be losing some sales tax revenue of about 6.6% for fiscal 2021. But in fact, our revenue collection is up. And so there's this gap here that we're trying to really understand. Next slide, please. And this just shows you what's happened since the new software. You see that just the blue line, which is the adjusted numbers, the ones that we use in our budget, have started, were differing from what the CDTFA did, and there were some corrections that we needed to make. So there's some discrepancy here. It just makes it more difficult to forecast. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So these are the monthly TransNet receipts that we've received all the way since June 1988. And you can see that there is volatility in this series. Those peaks usually represent like the Christmas shopping season, for instance. You'll see more sales tax revenue come in. And then, so you see little peaks and valleys. But even during the Great Recession, you see that the height or the variance there is pretty similar to what we saw before and after the Great Recession. And this goes out till 2017 when the new system was implemented. Next slide, please. And this is what the sales tax revenue payments look like since 2017. So a lot more volatility as they work through the issues. We get all of the money that we are due. It's just whether or not we actually get it in the right month. And so the issue here, or what I wanted to just explain here, it's a lot harder for us to try to forecast this. Forget about COVID. It's hard for us to forecast this because of the volatility in the data series. And so we've been struggling with this for the last couple of years. Next slide, please. So what are the economic factors that are really driving sales tax revenue collection? And the indicators from an economic perspective are kind of that we should have a reduction in sales tax revenue. We've had a significant job loss in the region. We've had lost wages in the region, but those lost wages have in large part been offset by the federal stimulus money. The GRP has definitely gone down. And so that usually means that we would have less taxable sales in the region. And so we would expect sales tax revenue to decline during this period. Next slide, please. And then when we took a look at employment in the region, the tourism was hit the hardest out of all of the industries in terms of employment. And this is kind of a proxy for sales tax revenue because the the tourism industry brings about $11 billion into the region each year. Those are people who are either traveling for business or they're traveling for pleasure. They come here, they spend money at hotels and motels, they spend money at our local restaurants, at SeaWorld, the zoo, et cetera. And much of that is translated into sales tax revenue. So we would expect that we would be seeing less sales tax coming from those areas. Next slide, please. And when we take a look at some of the big data that we kind of track, these are the different categories that we collect sales tax from. And you can see that the activity, the physical activity of people moving to these businesses is down somewhere between 30 and 50%. And it has been for the entire COVID, since the stay-at-home orders were issued, with the exception of home centers where a lot of people were going to places like Home Depot and Lowe's during the summertime and doing projects. And that's represented by that yellow line. But this too would indicate to us that potentially we should have less revenue coming in from places like restaurants and retailers. This data is collected using cell phone information, so we know the location of where people are going to, and so we can kind of track which industries are being affected. Next slide. So when we do a simple forecast and we try to understand what has happened, the green line represents what the forecast should be kind of based on economic activity. The blue line represents what we've been getting from the state of California. And so you see, if you look at the scale, there's month of collection and month of sales. Those are two different things. So month of sales represents the calendar month that things happened in. The month of collection is when the state of California actually gives us the money. So there's about a 2-month delay. And so we have to correct for that. So when we got our May payments, they were down and they really represented the March time period. So we believe that the reason it was down was due to the deferred payments for these small businesses. Then we went into the peak closures in April where many people were locked at home. So we would have expected sales tax revenue to decline, but in fact, it kind of increased according to the state. And then we reopened and reclosed, and you can see that these lines have kind of diverged. So this is what we're trying to understand as we go forward with the forecast. And understand we still don't have the second quarter data. So we're right now not able to really make this forecast with any degree of confidence. Next slide, please. This is a slide that shows the economic outlook of the 9 major economic forecasting firms. These are national firms. As you know, we do a consensus forecast. In early June, we took a look at the consensus forecast. The consensus was that the economy would be down about 7.8% in 2020 with a rebound of about 4.1% in 2021. However, with the stimulus money that's come in, the economy did not go into as deep of a recession as we would have expected. And so the revised forecast in September was much better with a decrease of only 4.7% and then a recovery of about 4.2% in 2020, which is still a little bit below what we would have forecast pre-COVID, but much better than the forecasts that were coming out in June. Next slide. And this is the final slide I think I have. What the blue line represents is the collections of TransNet sales tax forecast, sales tax rather. And this takes us all the way to first quarter 2020 calendar year. And so you see that's where the blue line is. The red line was our forecast pre-COVID. And so you saw that, as you see, it's kind of in alignment with what was happening with previously. We weren't looking at a recession. In June, we came to you with a budget amendment, and we were anticipating a V-shaped recovery, and we were using the 9 national firms that I talked about earlier to as a proxy for where we may go. That's represented by that dashed line. That would have been with a recovery sometime in 2023. But what we see based upon actual collections is that the story may not be that bad. That's the upper dotted line that looks like it may take us back to where we would have expected to be in just a year or so. But the forecast based on a consensus U-shaped forecast is much lower than that. So the reality probably fits somewhere between there. The problem is we don't have Q2 data, which really represents that that time period where COVID really was, had taken hold, and we have data for that. So what we're waiting for right now is the end of the month when the data comes in. That will extend that blue line out another quarter. It will give us some confidence in terms of what direction we should go with the forecast. My belief right now is that it won't be as bad as we thought, just because of the way the sales tax collections are coming in. So in November 20th, we'll get that data. We will work at the end of this month and into early December to put together a new 5-year forecast, and then we provide that to the TransNet group, and we will present that to the board sometime after the first of the year. And so with that, I'd like to hand it off to Jose for some additional comments.
And get yourself a glass of water too.
Thank you. I'm going to do that right now.
Nice job, Ray.
All right. Thank you, Ray, and good morning, Vice Chair. So before I turn it over to Don to provide details of our short-term challenges and potential options to address and manage this period of economic uncertainty that Ray just went over, and I'd like to provide additional context. So you may recall that about a year ago, the board approved programming about $600 million in TransNet, state and federal funds for over 3 dozen projects, in funds that were anticipated to arrive year over year from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 25. These funds represented the entirety of the formula funds anticipated through this period that were not already programmed on some of the project. So since then, work has started, or it's been expanded on many of these projects, and great progress is being made despite the pandemic. However, it really goes without saying that under current economic conditions, some of that $600 million that the board budgeted a year ago may not arrive as anticipated, and unless measures are taken, are likely to result in cash flow shortfalls. So this would be further exacerbated by the way that funding for transportation works. So as some of you know from your own cities, state and federal funds work on a reimbursed basis. This means that an agency must front its own local funds first to pay for contractors and consultants before submitting a reimbursement claim to the state or federal governments. In some instances, the local agency, or SANDAG in our case, must hold this expense for several months. Given how funding works, having sufficient local dollars to make these advance payments is essential. So for the uncertainty of how long and how deep the economic impacts will be on TransNet revenue collections, staff has analyzed a number of options that would give the board additional flexibility and expanded financial tools to ensure that disruptions to ongoing projects are minimized and that sufficient funding is available to make these advance payments. Most of these options are familiar to you and have in fact been used in the past as part of the agency's cash management. Some of these actions options are actions that staff would recommend regardless of the economic conditions, as it would provide short and long-term savings, stretching the value of the TransNet dollar. And in fact, the next item, the TIFIA item, will be covering one of those options. Other actions are more prudent and conservative in nature and are intended to help the agency address and manage through this period of uncertainty. And while no approval is being requested today, staff will recommend that the board approve in the next month or so all actions included for consideration today. So with that, I will turn it over to Dawn to provide more details. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Ray and Jose, both. Next slide, please. Thanks. On an annual basis, SANDAG staff updates the cost and revenues for the plan of finance to assess the health and funding needs of the TransNet program. And as mentioned, last September, new projects were programmed and to the fiscal year 2021 budget, and those costs have been incorporated in the plan of finance model with revenue updates to reflect the estimates when the budget was adopted. And as a result, in the short term, what we saw is over the next 5 years, the projected cash flow needs are exceeding anticipated revenues in the range of $170 to $220 million. Next slide, please. So identifying these shortfalls and borrowing needs is not unusual. SANDAG has generally issued debt about every 2 years through 2016 for the TransNet Major Corridor Program. And then we also had some subsequent financing items directly for the Midcoast project that were backed by the TIFIA loan and our federal full funding grant agreement. And you may recall that there was a refunding just about a year ago that freed up some borrowing capacity, which allowed additional bonding for the bike program, but not for the Major Corridor Program. Next slide, please. So in May of this year, the short-term revenue forecast was reduced due to COVID impacts. And as Ray mentioned, there's a great deal of uncertainty what the economic recovery will look like and if the estimates will need to be reduced further in some years, or if the true up will show something else. So with that uncertainty at the local level, there's also uncertainty in state revenues, and those have been reforecast. The latest update indicated significant reductions in state allocation capacity in fiscal years 2021 and 22. So while there is uncertainty, there are also some favorable economic conditions to reduce debt service and free up new capacity. Next slide, please. So today we will be presenting options to consider. None of them by themselves is enough because the current situation requires a combination of strategies. These strategies include refinancing existing bonds to free up capacity for new borrowing, releasing the debt service reserve fund on the 2008 series bonds, executing interfund loans, and increasing the commercial paper program. Next slide, please. So starting with the refinancing and new borrowing. Current conditions are such that refunding remaining 2014 bonds is recommended, and it's estimated to generate about $24.7 million, 14 million of which would be in the short-term period fiscal year 2021 to 2025. So these same conditions also make it very favorable to refund the TIFIA loan and replace it with a lower interest rate loan that could generate over 100 million in savings, most of which is long-term savings on the Commission's junior subordinate lien starting in 2026. So if the rate on a refinanced TIFIA loan were as low as 1.5%, the savings could be up to 156.2 million shown. If the rates are significantly higher, 1.75% would generate still over 113 million. So refinancing the TIFIA loan is a very key part of this plan. Finally, if we delay the draw on the TIFIA loan and the short-term notes are refinanced, an additional 10.5 million could be saved long-term, and we could potentially delay those short-term notes another 12 to 18 months. It's allowable under the TIFIA policy because the draw just has to occur within 1 year of revenue service. So we could be delaying that till November 2022. And these refunding actions would free up enough capacity for a new debt issuance with proceeds of roughly 113 million. Next slide, please. So we would still need other options to bridge the gap, and these do include releasing the debt service reserve fund on the 2008 bonds of about $17 million. A debt service reserve fund was very typical when those bonds were issued. However, we haven't carried debt service reserve funds on subsequent issuances, and the credit rating of the Commission has not relied on having debt service reserve funds. SANDAG funds debt service payments monthly in advance, which mitigates risks for investors. And SANDAG is working with Bond Counsel to determine the easiest mechanism to release the funding. Next slide, please. Excuse me. The next option is interfund loans. They're essentially internal borrowing from one fund to another and a way to internalize risk while minimizing the borrowing cost. They are allowable under the ordinance, and the example you may be familiar with is the Major Corridor loan to the Environmental Mitigation Program. Interfund loans could be used to continue funding the environmental mitigation program without additional borrowing from the major corridor program. Instead, local environmental mitigation program funds could be loaned to the major corridor environmental program with interest to be repaid to the local program. Next slide, please. So the next option is increasing the commercial paper program. Increasing the program would provide additional flexibility through the next 5 years to help address some of the short-term cash flow needs. The current commercial paper program is set at 100 million, and it could be increased to 200 million. Next slide, please. So even with all these options, there's a remaining gap of $40 to $90 million. And this could be addressed by delaying projects starting in 2022. The board would have this discussion as part of the fiscal year 2022 budget development process, starting in February or March 2021, at which point we should have a better idea where the revenue projections will be. In the past, the board traditionally has chosen to continue forward with active projects and hold on those projects that haven't started yet. Next slide, please. So the agenda item before you includes a memorandum from our financial advisor, PFM, as attachment 1. And this attachment outlines the strategies that were presented today to you. Also considered our SANDAG's debt policy, our existing indentures, our debt service coverage ratio, and credit ratings. As indicated on page 9 of the memorandum, the described refundings and new issuance could decrease SANDAG's debt service coverage on the senior lien from 2.86 to 2.71. So what this means is for every dollar of debt service on the senior lien, there would be $2.71 of sales tax collected the prior fiscal year. And this should still support the AAA credit rating on the senior lien. Next slide, please. So the schedule for next steps is as follows. So this month, we're hearing at the board of directors to start the dialogue. And in November, we are also working to select underwriters and both bond and disclosure counsel, while at the same time, we're working on TIFIA documents, as you will hear in the next presentation. We expect to be back in December with proposed financing documents. Excuse me. And those financing documents would come for approval in January. In January, there is also a commercial paper item coming to the board for approval that could include a proposal to increase the line of credit. We expect the TIFIA refinance to be complete by the end of December or early January timeframe. And also in early 2021, we would come back for approval for the refinance of short-term notes. We expect updated revenue forecasts to inform the fiscal year 2022 draft budget scheduled for consideration in March 2021, with the final budget adoption scheduled for May 2022. And that concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it back to you, Vice Chair Sankey.
Thanks so very much, Don. That's a lot to consider.
Vice Chair.
Yes, go ahead. It's Hassan.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray, Jose, and Don. I just want to make sure the committee members are leaving here totally understanding of this fact, that there is right now a cash flow issue of somewhere between 170 to 220 million dollars. That's real. What Don presented is options to deal with reducing that. But at the end of the day, the board of SANDAG is going to have to make tough decisions of delaying some projects. There's no way around it. Even if we do everything that Don outlined, there will be a shortfall. And let me remind the committee also that this shortfall is not due to COVID. This is mainly, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jose, that it's mainly because of rising project cost. This is not a new phenomenon when you do that. So we have a lot of work to do in cash flow management for the next few years. But definitely shortly, the board's going to have to make tough decisions of which project or which work we delay. And in the meanwhile, our staff are totally amazing when it comes to refinancing and bringing in all the other mechanism that Dan went over. But make no mistake about it, we have a cash flow issue that ranges between 170 and $220 million. And I don't want you to leave here thinking, oh, they're going to take care of it. It's not that easy. So with that,
Hassan, let me ask you a quick question on that. Over the last couple of years, we've come up with all sorts of things, corridor plans, and we've thrown other curveballs your way. You've done quite a bit of planning on the Navy Spay War property. Have we initiated new things in the last 2 years that have sort of made it harder for us to do the longer term stuff that we planned for?
No. I think everything you just mentioned, all the corridor plans, they will be on the table when we discuss priorities. Everything. But this is you know, you don't usually forecast a huge increase that we've seen in project cost. The corridor plans, which is about $40 million total, about I believe 12 corridors. The NAVWAR project, which that's one of the projects that's really moving faster, and I didn't want to take too long to update the committee today, but we're really hopeful that this NAVWAR project is going to start becoming a reality in a year or so. But everything is on the table for the board to say, okay, we're going to delay the corridor studies for a year or two, or we're going to, we maybe, the staff might look to the board and say, okay, we're going to keep everything that we started going, but we're not going to start any new project period until we fix the cash flow problem. I mean, these are all options, but you're right on. We started these corridor studies with the right financial assumptions, and now we have this cash flow issue that we have to deal with.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I'm going to kick this to public comment at this point. Do we have any public comments on this one? Jewel, I'll get to you in a second. And Francesca, am I saying, yeah, no public comments? Okay, I'll go ahead and call on Jewel. Jewel, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you, Hassan. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for the presentations. When might we expect more direction from staff regarding the different options? And when will this be coming back for a vote? Or will it come to TC for a vote or go straight to the board for a vote?
In December, I think we're planning to go back to TC and the board. I believe probably go for a vote in January after we do our homework of all the options that Dan went over. But yes, you will absolutely hear, probably make a recommendation to the board, maybe late December. We still, for us to be able to inform you with all the things we have, we still have some work to do. But I also want you to know that the three individuals that presented to you, Ray, Jose, Don, they're the best in the nation, in the state actually. The people come to them for advice. So I'm almost certain they're going to do everything they can to get it to you as soon as possible. I do want you to know that we're going to adopt a new budget. We're going to start a discussion on a new budget in March. And by then we should have everything resolved, because when we go to you with a budget, it has to be a recommendation that's financially constrained.
Okay, thank you.
Jose, Dan, is that the schedule you had in mind, or did I?
Well, we do have the TIFIA item. That is the next item. And we are requesting a recommendation on that particular item.
So we'll get to that one next. Okay, thank you. Jose, you good? All right. Chris Ward. Oh, did you want to add something, Jose? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say the same thing that Don said, but she said
okay. Thank you very much. Chris Ward, I believe you have some comments or a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Sankey, and thank you everybody for the presentation. I just had two kind of broad questions, one on the revenue side, but also one on the expense side. I recognize a lot of good strategies here. if some of them might have been employed anyway, regardless of some of these COVID-related revenue impacts, those are always a good thing to do. If there are cost-saving ways, of course, going forward, we could have utilized those under any scenario. But I think what might be helpful, maybe not for this item here today, but as this comes forward to the full board for presentation, is a little more clarity on sort of what the opportunity costs are here for some of these strategies. And I guess what I mean by that is, you know, by taking some of these measures, I'm sure we'll get into it in item 6 as well. What additional expenses are we incurring over the long run? Obviously, you know, I recognize the realities here, and we have to be able to figure out something to keep these projects on budget and on time to every extent. But what does that mean for this organization in the long run, because we need to make certain financing decisions here today? So that's kind of on the expense sides. And then on the revenue side. On the expense side, again, just a broad question that doesn't need a specific answer here today, but I wonder what Sandag is doing maybe under some of the lessons learned, experiences learned in these COVID times. So I'll just say generally, as I'm usually in the urban core area of the region, but sometimes, you know, commuting or around the region, freeway flow feels better. And we know that because we have kind of hit below some of those critical thresholds. Has this caused Sandag to have to reevaluate any of its timeline or prioritization for some of these projects right now? I know there's huge uncertainty about what things are going to look like after we return to some normalcy post-COVID. But, you know, if there is going to be some concerted effort around telework, around trying to maybe try to relax some of the daily commutes that we had experienced prior to COVID, is that going to inform maybe this 5-year plan or even other long-range plans that in turn will help us be able to sort of smooth out this budget gap as well?
Let me start with the last part of the question, and I'll let staff answer the first. We're absolutely going to consider COVID-19 in our thinking, especially when it comes to things like telecommuting. But here is a fact that it really be premature to start planning based on what the other side of COVID-19 look like. It will be also short-sighted to think that, you know, people's going to stop traveling and taking transit, et cetera, et cetera. I think right now it's fair to say transit ridership was significantly down, is still down, will continue probably to be down for the next year or so. But, you know, a vaccine is found and you never know what the other side of COVID-19 look like. But here what we think, there's opportunities to use this to encourage employers, both public and private, to allow their employees to telecommute. That might not reduce the traffic. As a matter of fact, Gustavo is here. I think traffic is up to 90% of what was pre-COVID, but that might spread the peak so you don't have the congestion that you usually see when everyone is working from the office. I think Antoinette is here. She can be more specific. We're doing a lot of data collection and telecommuting. We try to figure out what impact that could be in our investment. But the bottom line is we're still too early to actually make a policy recommendation based on what we saw so far. So
I appreciate that. In the interest of time, I don't think I need any more specifics from Colette, but I just kind of raise it open-ended. I'm sure that's hopefully something that you're looking at as well, even if it's just an exercise based on what we know here today, and you know, looking at different alternatives for what this might look like in the 2022 horizon. You know, we might be able to see some major relief predicted for some of these corridors that we otherwise thought were a priority project, you know, in 2019.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ward. Anybody else with comments from the committee? Okay, if you wouldn't mind popping back to slide number 17, please. Chris, you brought up opportunity costs, and one of the things that I discussed in the pre-meeting with the Sandag folks was the opportunity costs in terms of bond rating related to us giving up the debt service reserve funds. It's only a $17 million get, and it might help us in terms of the bond rating going forward, because obviously we're gonna need to do some more borrowing. The interfund loan transfers seemed like a pretty much a no-brainer. Let's get the money where it needs to be used and is being used. Question for staff, is the number one there, refinance existing bonds, is that the one we're going to deal with in the next agenda item, or is that a different set of bonds that we're going to?
It's a specific component of that. So refinancing existing bonds, that option included the TIFIA loan refinancing, but there will be a subsequent item coming in December for refunding some of the 2014 bonds.
Refinancing, you mean, or refunding?
Yeah, well,
refinancing, yes, same thing.
Yeah, so that would essentially further help lower some borrowing cost and would create some of that capacity to issue additional bonds. And depending on how that is structured, can really help with the short-term relief that we need.
And you mentioned, Don, while you're here, you mentioned in your comments that if we release the debt service funds, we won't have an issue with our debt service rating, or our AAA, according to the appendix, page 9, I believe it was you referenced.
Yes, we wouldn't anticipate that would impact our credit ratings. Okay. And Peter Schellenberger, our financial advisor, is here with us today if you would like to hear anything more.
No, I don't think so. I think that just the assurance from the appendix and the documentation lets me feel comfortable that that's our position.
So just to be clear, we're going to listen to our financial advisor, but I would be very reluctant to exhaust the reserve fund that we have. Let's put it this way, because things could come up that's more critical that you can deal with. So we're going to discuss all of that and see the pros and cons as we move forward.
I concur with that as the one of the 4 options that we've been given that I wouldn't be leaning towards if we were to make a recommendation as a committee today. The final thing I would say is the commercial paper addition. That's a plus for the regions as well, because those funds are available for a portion of those are available for the regions to use for their local projects as matches or to cover certain costs. So I would certainly be in favor of that portion. Is there any other comments or questions from the folks on the committee? All right, well, in the true spirit of doing what staff told me to do, I'm going to leave this as just our receiving the report and not giving a recommendation to the board. They would chew it up anyway and decide what they want to do on their own. But I think Hassan, hearing you talk about keeping that that reserve as a backstop for some really short-term needs. Obviously, $17 million isn't a ton of cash when it comes to the size of the projects that we do here. But of those 3, and you may say the sense of the board if you want, or the sense of the committee, that was.
Not that Jose and Don and Ray is going to listen to us, but that's you know.
Well, I would just like to clarify that that particular reserve fund is not the same reserve fund account for the major corridor program that the board set aside after the refinancing of the 125 toll road for capital projects. Those reserve funds are available, the 54 million or so, upon the board's action to access those particular reserve funds. These particular reserve funds are in an account that is not accessible to us without an official release of it. It's something that was set aside for debt service reserve against the bonds for investors. So just for that security. So it is slightly different when we're talking about the particular reserve funds.
Yeah, it's not like a home equity loan or anything like that. I did have one other question though. You mentioned earlier the refinancing of bonds that would go only for the bike program and not for major corridors programs or other spending needs. Did we actually do that bond?
Yes, in January, I believe January of this year, we issued bonds for the bike program.
Yeah, I remember that discussion. I just couldn't remember the resolution thereof. Okay, well, at the risk of making this agenda item take longer than it has to, last call for any member comments on this one. And we're going to let this go without a recommendation to the board, just that we heard it and you heard our comments. Okay, moving on. Item number 6, Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act Federal Credit Assistance. Because this seems like, as I read the agenda item, a switch of interest rates from 2 and change to almost 1. This seems a little bit like a no-brainer to me, thinking as a homeowner. But and so if you could keep the staff report focused on exactly what we're doing, why, and I would hope that we'd be able to get to a recommendation to this reasonably quickly. Go ahead, Andre. Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chair Sankey, and good morning, members of the committee. So I'll just introduce the item really quick and then turn it over to Dawn. But I think you got kind of a snapshot of what we're doing in the item that we just discussed. So you're aware that the Mid-Coast has been constructed here over the last several years with the completion almost next year. And along with that, we've done several financings over the year, including, short-term loans, the bond anticipation notes, long-term bonds, the grant anticipation notes, which is against our $1 billion FFGA. And one of the items that we also took out in 2017 was the TIFIA loan, which we have not drawn on yet. Now, back in 2017, that rate was really favorable at 2.72%. But as Vice Chair just noted, rates have really fallen based on COVID. The Federal Reserve slashed short-term rates almost down to 0%. And with that, long-term rates also have fallen. So that's one of the items that we just discussed earlier. As you mentioned, it's kind of a no-brainer for us to go ahead and basically get a new loan. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So along with the SANDAG team that's working on this effort, we also are working with PFM, our financial advisors, and our outside bond counsel, and Victor Xu and Peter are both on the line today, just in case you may have any questions for them. Next slide. So again, if you just go through the 3 items, please. We're going to be talking about why we're replacing the loan in general because of a lower interest rates. We'll go through the description of the main components of the loan that are in front of you today, as well as reviewing the loan documents. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dawn so she can actually go through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Andre. So before I begin, I want to address the blue sheet or updates to the reports and attachment since the agenda posting last Friday. So first, an additional attachment was added to the item. Attachment 7 is our memorandum from the financial advisor, PFM. And then next, an Exhibit A was added to attachment 1, as shown on page 7 of the report, or page 31 if you're following the full PDF. And this provides a required good faith estimate. Attachment 2 is the actual draft TIFIA loan agreement, and it contains the following changes. On page 84 of the report and 108 of the PDF, we updated the annual servicing fee for TIFIA from the $13,000 it used to be to the $14,000 it is now. And then on page 88 of the report and 112 of the PDF, we deleted, the name of the previous deputy executive director, and that same change was made twice more in Exhibit K, pages 123 and 126 of the report, or 147 and 150 of the PDF. And then finally on page 130 of the report and 154, if you're following the PDF, the name of the previous clerk was deleted since we've had a change in clerk. So now we can get down to business. So next slide, please. So why are we replacing the loan? As you've already heard, we have an opportunity with low long-term interest rates to save over $100 million by refinancing. And as actually stated in the report, the original Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or TIFIA loan, was executed in June 2017 at that interest rate of 2.72%. Previously, the Build America Bureau would not have considered a replacement of an executed TIFIA loan But since COVID, they have adapted some practices to provide a streamlined process for replacement of existing loans that haven't drawn down their funds. And so Sandag began working with PFM and the Build America Bureau in summer to analyze our options. And then in September, we submitted a letter of interest to secure a replacement loan. This particular item is being accelerated to meet a December 9th meeting of the Council on Credit and Finance, commonly referred to as the Credit Council. There is no Credit Council meeting set for January. And with the change in administration, there's some risk of delay if we don't receive the approval in December. So additionally, the 30-year Treasury rate upon which the TIFIA loan is based has been below 2% since late February, but has started inching upward in recent months. So it's prudent to work toward execution of the loan quickly while we monitor the rate. Next slide, please. The loan terms are expected to remain consistent with the original loan, with the exception of the interest rate. And so just a quick review of the terms. We have in the loan a single draw of funds. There is a 5-year deferred repayment period after we draw on the funds. The loan is on a junior subordinate lien and includes increasing our backloaded debt service rather than our typical level debt service that's on our senior lien. It acknowledges the issuance of our short-term notes that will be refunded by the TIFIA draw. And it does include some specific requirements for maintaining our debt service coverage, our credit ratings, and meeting additional bonds tests. So none of these terms are expected to change from the current loan, again, as mentioned, other than the interest rate. Next slide. So the cost of the replacement loan are expected to be less than the original loan because the Build America Bureau has not requested any new credit ratings for the application, and they did waive additional review by their contracted financial advisors since we've already been through that once before, and we haven't had significant changes in our financial modeling. So Sandag will need to pay its own legal and advisory costs, and we will need to pay the legal cost on behalf of the Build America Bureau. And as with the original loan, there is that annual servicing fee that we'll have every year. The 2020 fee was $14,000. Next slide, please. So Sandag has debt obligations on the 3 separate lien levels, and it provides a different priority of sales tax payments to investors based on their respective lien level. The TIFIA loan, again, is on the 3rd lien. It's a junior subordinate lien obligation. And the primary benefit to the replacement loan is to reduce long-term debt, as discussed earlier in the presentation. Next slide. So just to quickly review, and Andre mentioned this, we currently have AAA ratings on senior lien obligations. And in June 2020, Standard & Poor's and Fitch affirmed the ratings on the junior subordinate or TIFIA lien of A+ and A respectively. As mentioned also, their Build America Bureau is not going to require new ratings for the TIFIA loan application. And so with that, we'll move into the specific attachments that we need to review with you. Next slide, please. So the first attachment is a resolution approving the TIFIA financing method and authorizing the executive director to execute the documents on behalf of Sandag, also acting as the Regional Transportation Commission. These documents include the TIFIA loan agreement and the bond, and the Sandag and MTS direct agreements, and the 10th supplemental agreement. The Regional Transportation Commission, as the TIFIA borrower, is the signatory to the direct agreements as well. And the direct agreements reflect project delivery commitments of Sandag and MTS, for which the commission is borrowing the funds. Next slide, please. All right, attachment 2 is the TIFIA loan agreement that reflects the terms discussed previously, with no significant changes anticipated other than the interest rate update. And then In places where general information is outdated, it will be updated as demonstrated by the blue sheet updates to the additional signatories. Next slide, please. Attachment 3 is the SANDAG direct agreement. And this provides updates to the existing agreement that are needed to reference the replacement TIFIA loan and update the signatories. It reflects SANDAG's role as the implementing agency for the project, as the party to the FTA full funding grant agreement for the project, and as the contracting agency for our construction contract. Next slide, please. Thanks. Attachment 4 is the MTS direct agreement. And this agreement is also being updated to reference the replacement TIFIA loan and update the signatories. This particular agreement reflects MTS's role as the contracting agency for things like the acquisition of the vehicles, the traction power substations, and the fare collection system, and as well as their role as the eventual operator of the project. Next slide, please. Attachment 5 is the 10th supplemental indenture, and this is needed to reference the new TIFIA loan and bond, since the existing loan will be canceled once the new loan is executed. The 7th supplemental indenture remains in effect for other provisions that were included in that particular indenture. Next slide, please. Attachment 6 is a second resolution, and this one is needed to authorize the executive director to execute the SANDAG direct agreement on behalf of SANDAG. So this is slightly different than the earlier resolution that authorizes the actions on behalf of the commission. Next slide, please. Finally, attachment 7 is the memorandum from our financial advisor. It provides a market update and discusses the TIFIA loan structure and financial considerations. And we do have our financial advisor here today if at the end of the presentation you have additional questions. Next slide, please. So just quickly reviewing next steps. In early December, we expect loan approval and then hopefully loan as execution by late December or early January. And we have a request before you today. Next slide. So today, the Transportation Committee is asked to recommend that the Board of Directors, acting as the Regional Transportation Commission, approve a Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or TIFIA loan agreement, and associated direct agreements to secure a replacement loan for the Mid-Coast Corridor Transit Project and the 10th supplemental indenture providing for the issuance of a junior subordinate sales tax revenue bond evidencing the RTC obligations under the TIFIA loan agreement. Additionally, the Transportation Committee is asked to recommend that the board, also acting as the RTC, next slide, thanks, approve the replacement TIFIA financing method for the Mid-Coast Corridor Transit Project, to adopt RTC resolution number RTC 2021-02, authorizing the executive director to execute the TIFIA loan agreement and direct agreements and the 10th supplemental indenture. And 3, adopt RTC resolution number RTC 2021-03, authorizing the executive director to execute the SANDAG direct agreement. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dawn, very much for that very detailed report. I go to the public first. Are there any public raised hands or public wishing to speak?
I don't see any hands raised at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions of our financial advisor or the 2 staff members who presented this report today from our committee?
I have one question.
Sounds like you, Jewel? Go ahead.
That is me, Jewel. Thank you for the very thorough report. You mentioned the rate today, and my question is whether that rate is subject to change until the close of the loan, or is it locked like with the mortgage?
So once the loan closes, the rate is set, but the the rate that we get at the time that we close the loan is actually the rate plus 1 basis point on the day that we close the loan. So it is still subject to change. It won't necessarily be today's rate. That's why we provided some numbers. The rate when we started this was hovering in the 1.5%. It's been inching up. So we kind of redid the numbers at 1.75, which generates about 113 million. So we're watching the rate as we continue, but we are trying to move rather quickly as we watch that rate start inching up. We would like to achieve, obviously, as much savings as we can.
Right. Well, thank you. I think that based on the terms and conditions and what I'm hearing and what, as Bill said in the start of this, it pretty much passes the common sense to move forward. And I think it's prudent to move forward on this item and would use staff's approval.
That sounds like a motion to me. Thank you very much, Jewel. I could use a second for this one.
Second, Benelli.
Second from Member Benelli. Thank you very much. And
I have a question.
Bring it on. Discussion. Yeah, question.
Andre and the financial team, you might have touched on this and I might have missed it. If we go ahead with executing this TIFIA loan, what does it do to the agency's credit rating?
Yeah, good to see you, Commissioner. Actually, this is on what we call the junior lien. And so it doesn't impact our AAA ratings on our senior lien. And we do actually have a credit on our junior lien, which is A-rated by Fitch, and it's actually A+ by S&P. In fact, that was upgraded last year from A to A+. So it sits on our junior lien and should not have any impact to our senior lien.
Thanks, Andre. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good question. We talked about that credit rating on the last item as well. Okay, I've got a motion and a second. Unless there's any other discussion, speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, Clerk, would you go ahead and take us through a vote?
Thank you. For the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority, Joanna Schiavone.
Schiavone, yes.
Thank you. For the City of San Diego, Councilmember Ward.
Vote yes.
Thank you. We do not have a member present for the County of San Diego, so I will mark them absent. For East County, Councilmember Mendoza.
Yes.
Thank you. Metropolitan Transit System also is absent. For North County Coastal, Mayor Edson.
Edson, yes.
Thank you. For North County Inland, Mayor McNamara.
McNamara, yes.
Thank you. For North County Transit District, Deputy Mayor Feller.
Feller, yes.
Thank you. And for the Port of San Diego, Commissioner Benelli.
Benelli, yes.
Thank you. And for South County, Vice Chair Sankey.
Yeah, I guess Mayor Sotelo Solis has an event in National City Day, and I think Supervisor Cox is using up some of his vacation days. South County is a yes.
Thank you very much, and that does pass with the 2 absences.
Thank you very much. Let's move on then. We've got the roll call vote done, and we are ready for the North Coast Corridor Program, item number 7. It's a status update. I think Alan's going to show us his vacation slides. Is that right?
I wish. Thank you, Vice Chair Sankey.
You bet.
I'm Alan Kossip. I'm the I-5 Corridor Director for everything North Coast Corridor. Next slide. And we wanted to provide an update on the construction that you see out there. And just as a way of reminder, the total construction is about $870 million. Has 4 major elements, including the double tracking in Cardiff, replacement of the Cardiff rail bridge over the San Alejo Lagoon, extension of the carpool lanes, 13 miles from basically Solana Beach all the way up to State Route 78. As well as active transportation improvements and restoration of the San Alejo Lagoon. Next slide. There's an animation, so just click through the next 2. Perfect, thank you. This $870 million project's being accomplished through 6 individual contracts with the contractor, FSSW, 3 of those contracts are substantially complete. And as you can see, two more are substantially down the road of completion. And we have 1 more, Palomar to 78, which is still under negotiations. And we'll talk about that contract today. Next slide. So before we talk about construction, I do like to kind of lead off with a little bit of COVID update in terms of how COVID has impacted traffic. If you remember during the full closure in early spring, traffic volumes throughout the county were down about 60% of normal compared to the year previously. Over the last 3 or 4 months, we've been rebounded back to essentially 90%. As Director Hassan had said, we're about 90% of normal, and that's been pretty stable through the last couple of months. Next slide. So today's update, we want to touch on a couple of successes since last time we were here in April. We've accomplished some major milestones. We also want to provide an update on the 2 remaining challenges the project has. Next slide. So on the completion front, I think in April when we were here, we talked about grading in the on the San Alejo restoration project being substantially complete. Since April, we've been able to reopen the trails and reopen and actually open these new connections. What you see here is there's 2 of these new bridges that allow people to move in the central basin from the north end of the lagoon in Cardiff to the south end in Solana Beach. These have been opened and all the trails in the central basin are reopened. Next slide. And the planting is complete as well. So for all intents and purposes, the restoration project is complete and we're now entering into plant establishment. The good news is biologists report that there are new species that haven't, fish species that have been in the lagoon that haven't been there in 50, 60 years. And plants are actually self-recruiting and coming back already. So by all information that we're hearing from the biologists, the project is extremely successful. And we've had good feedback from the public in terms of using the new trails that are out there. Next slide. Also, on the active transportation front, we completed 2 enhancements in Encinitas. This is at Santa Fe, what it used to look like in 2012. You can kind of see that pedestrians essentially use the shoulder to move east to west across the freeway or through under the freeway. Next slide. This is what it looks like today. You can see that we've pushed back the abutments under the undercrossing and freed up space for both the sidewalk and bicycles. This is on both sides. We have this at Santa Fe. We also have this at Encinitas, and both facilities are open. Next slide. We're also, we've had great partnerships with all of the cities along the project, and this is an example of, you know, what came out. One of the things that came out of that partnership, we worked with the city of Encinitas and their local art committee to build these mosaics into the actual retaining wall. And these were mosaics that were done by the public, and then converted into these arts. So I think everyone's been really happy and it's been a big success. And I think it's a good example when we talk about complete corridors and integrating all types of modes into one project. This type of thing really highlights the synergies that can happen and the untapped opportunities that we really haven't been able to get to in the past. Next slide. Since April, we've been able to complete the median work, basically from Manchester up to Palomar Airport. The median work is all complete. We've now shifted to the outside widening. Next slide. This includes some weekend closures of the ramps of various interchanges so that we can get all the work done in one weekend, one 56-hour closure. We go sort of ramp by or interchange by interchange. Working with the cities, and again, this has been a success as well. I think our next closures are coming up in early December. Next slide. On to the column construction at Manchester. If you drive through here, you always see a lot of work right now in the middle of the freeway. And if you've been with me through all of these presentations starting in 2017, you know that the columns have been the most challenging piece of construction. These columns are 10 foot in diameter, about 240 feet deep. So it's about a 22-story building into the ground. They definitely have been a challenge. The good news is the last column is getting poured the last week in November, the first week in December. And so that's a major accomplishment for us, a major retirement of a major risk. Next slide. This is a slide that you kind of see, that's the hole. You know, essentially the slide before shows a casing. That casing drops into the ground, the 240 feet. And then the rebar cage gets dropped into that hole. So if you were to look straight down, it's 240 feet straight down. And then these casing or these rebar cages get dropped in there and then we pour the concrete. All in all, these foundations have taken about 12 to 14 months longer than we had hoped when we started construction. So the good news is we're finished. The bad news is they've taken a little bit longer than we thought. We've been able to absorb most of that time on this item by moving work around. And so from the big perspective, opening the carpool lanes to Palomar Airport Road and into Carlsbad, that hasn't been significantly adversely affected by this delay. We have been able to manage through that. Next slide. And you kind of see that in this table. You can see the first three contracts being substantially complete. In fact, the restoration project was completed ahead of time. The San Alejo Highway Bridge, that's the Manchester work. You see that work has slipped out about 14 months, but we still hope we're still on track to open it to public, the carpool lane there, by essentially a year from now. And that's the same time that we would plan to open the HOV lane from Manchester to Palomar. So we're still on track to be open to traffic on the carpool lane by late next year. Which brings us to the last contract, Palomar Airport Road to 78. Next slide. So this is the last 4 miles, gets us through Carlsbad. The good news is the project is shovel ready, which means the design is complete, project is fully permitted. We've been working with the contractor to negotiate price, and we're wrapping that up hopefully shortly. Over the last year, we've been working with the state and the CTC to try to advance about $90 million of funding, which is programmed in the 22-23 fiscal year. We're trying to program it so that we can break ground now. We're trying to advance that money. We've been working with them. They've been great partners, but obviously this has been a little bit, the complexity of it's increased with the COVID's impact to revenue projections. And we've looked at various options, including breaking the allocation up into annual amounts that are sort of tailored to the cash flow of the project. We've also looked with them about the option of Garvey bonding the entire project and moving that. Advancing this funds is really, you know, the advantage of this is twofold. Obviously, we can open it up to the traveling public 18 months earlier, but we also have significant cost savings associated with, or we're reducing our risk for increased costs related to escalation and having the contractor mobilize and demobilize. So it really is in our best interest to get this project out and into construction. So the good news is in the last couple of weeks, we've had CTC has come back to us and has agreed to vote the first $10 million in January at the January CTC meeting. We would match that $10 million of STIP funds with additional federal funds that we have here locally. And that $25 million total project would get us through most of 2021. So we'd be able to break ground into median, begin median work, and work through 2021. During that time, we Caltrans, Sandag, and the CTC would work very, we're committed to making the rest of the funding package come together. And I think the fact that the CTC is willing to vote that $10 million is a strong indication that we're all committed to getting this project underway. It's certainly maybe a little unconventional to begin construction without all of the funds in hand. But I do believe that everyone understands the challenge, the risks associated with it, as well as the opportunity. I'm very confident that over the next 10 months, we will find a way to bring the remaining funds forward and the project won't miss a beat. So really next step for us is the January vote, and then we'll be off and running into construction, hopefully as early as March. Next slide. So that's the general overview. In a nutshell, I think the project, is beginning to see the goodness of the project as these pieces are delivered and open to the public. Any project this large and in this, coastal location is going to have its challenges, and we've certainly had a few. But we've been able to manage through those with the great partnership that we have with the local cities, our contractor, and then with the region and the state. So appreciate everyone's help, and I think we're nearing the home stretch. With that, any questions?
Thanks, Alan, very much for that presentation. Quick question on money. Was that shortfall for those completing those lanes included in the agenda item we heard number 4 that included the $170 to $220 million of shortfall, or is that a different pile of money?
I would defer to Don, but it's a different pile of money. I mean, we don't see it as a shortfall as much as we see it as an advancement.
Okay, that makes sense. And the CTC is supporting it. $10 million is a little bit, but it certainly is being supported. Moving it forward with the contractor on site makes total sense. So hopefully they can A, deliver us the money we need to get rolling, and B, take advantage of getting the thing done 18 months earlier for the traveling public. And I think anytime people see stuff happening, it's a good thing for the agency and a good thing for our region. Any questions or comments for Alan? Excuse me, let me go to the public first. Public. Any public comments on Alan's presentation?
I don't believe we have any public comments.
Okay. And Jack Feller would like to be our first committee respondent. And I kind of knew that was going to happen. Jack, good to see you. Go ahead and unmute yourself, I think.
Can we go back to slide 16, please?
Good morning, Jack. Good to see you.
Hey, how you doing?
Tippy tappy with a song in my heart.
The little green line that's the new carpool lanes, those are in the center of the freeway. Is there any connection to change for 78 and Vista Way and the lanes north of that connection? Are there was some discussion, I believe, not too long ago, that there would be a little widening on that about from Cassidy going south, Alan. So, I mean, I'm sure glad Carlsbad's getting everything they need, but we'd sure like to have some help up here.
Is your question whether a carpool lane person traveling the carpool lane 5 north would be able to stay in the carpool lane and get to the 78 without having to cross traffic to get to the off ramp?
Right.
Okay.
So the project that's funded and under construction stops at 78. I do think it's going to help improve that bottleneck that you see there, but it does not improve the actual connectors. That is a separate project that the region has funded. Funding begins for the environmental process in the 22-23 fiscal year. So the connectors are a separate project.
Okey doke. That's all I need. Thanks.
Jack, I feel for you, man. I feel for you. You've talked about this before, and I do understand that we're dumping HOV lanes into you without getting them started. So hang in there. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Okay, we'll call that one a day. Alan, thanks so much for keeping us updated. It's interesting that we can actually make some real progress in the region. People can see stuff happening, and seeing the Sandag logo on those projects is a good thing for our organization as well. So to the kudos to the communications and marketing staff on I'm seeing more of those Sandag logos around, and any good press is good press.
Bill, my hand's been raised.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't catch that. I don't see hand raised on my screen,
No worries.
but go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on the San Elijo Lagoon pedestrian bridges. The trails and bridges are outstanding. It's an amazing improvement. And it was good to hear that species are reestablishing themselves that haven't been seen in quite some time. Also, the community art installations, if anyone has not gone under those undercrossings at Santa Fe and Encinitas Boulevard, it's worth checking out. You can socially distance by driving past in your car. Check it out. And in general, the multimodal bike and pedestrian improvements are just outstanding for the North County community. And I just wanted to express my appreciation for all of that.
Thanks for pointing that out. You're exactly right. And when it comes to model projects, I know this was taking a long time, like decades. And what it is really road improvements, active transportation improvements, environmental improvements that work together to make this North County project just so much a success. So Alan, you and your team and everybody else, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item number 8. Our friends at the Port of San Diego have a draft port master plan update they'd like to share with us. I'd like to introduce committee member Admiral Gary Bonelli to help present this agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Thank you to my Transportation Committee colleagues. Good morning. A major initiative at the port is underway to update what we call our port master plan. It's sort of equivalent to each of the city's general plans or the county's community plans. Staff this morning will provide a succinct overview of the draft master plan update, along with upcoming milestones for completing this effort. In the interest of time, I realize we're the last item on the agenda, so we'll get through this relatively quick. But I'd like to just say that, keep as a reminder, before the pandemic, the port was an economic powerhouse for the region, contributing nearly $10 billion. 70,000 jobs, direct, indirect, and indirect. And we've got about 800 tenants and subtenants around the 34 miles of bay that's in our jurisdiction. The other 17 miles are controlled by the Navy and the Coast Guard. A key consideration during this update to the plan is mobility, and that's why we're before the Transportation Committee. The Port Master Plan update aims to address all forms of mobility, both from land and on the water. Commissioners, my fellow commissioners, are committed to ensuring mobility on Port Highlands is not viewed in a vacuum, and that we collaborate with our 5 member cities around the bay, as well as our fellow agencies at the federal, state, and local level to ensure our collective visions are coordinated. And that includes connectivity to the airport. Now I'll turn the presentation over to our guru, our Director of Planning, Miss Leslie Nishihira, and she also, I think with her, is Jason Giffens, the Port's Vice President of Planning, Environment, and Government Relations. Leslie, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Bonelli, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Just wanted to make sure my audio is working.
Audio's good there. Go ahead, Leslie.
Very good. Thank you. So I'm Leslie Nishihira, the Port's Planning Director, and as Gary mentioned, Jason Giffens with us as well. Thank you very much for including this item on your agenda this morning. The Port of San Diego has recently released a revised draft of the Port Master Plan update, which we call the PMPU. We've put that out for public comment, and today we'd like to provide you with some background on this effort, along with an overview of the mobility aspects of the master plan. Transportation in our region is such an important focus, and collaboration between our agencies has never been better. I'd like to thank you and your staff, specifically Colleen and her team, for the ongoing coordination on these issues, especially with respect to airport connectivity efforts. There is strong alignment between our visions and plans, and I hope you'll notice that many of the components in the PMPU support the regional plan's 5 big moves, such as introducing mobility hubs, emphasizing flexible fleets and complete corridors, and Transit Leap to encourage alternatives to automobiles on Port Tidelands. Next slide, please. So starting off with a brief background on the Port of San Diego. This graphic represents the tidelands and submerged lands granted to the Port of San Diego to manage on behalf of the state of California. The port's jurisdiction includes 5 member cities, 35 miles of waterfront, over 2,000 acres of land shown in orange, and over 3,600 acres of submerged lands shown in the lighter shade of blue. The darker blue area represents additional submerged lands of approximately 8,300 acres that were recently granted to the port just in January of this year pursuant to SB 507. So these newly granted lands are now under the port's management and will be incorporated into our master plan before 2024 pursuant to the legislation. Next slide. The port's legislative framework we operate under includes the Port Act, which established the port in 1962 and is based on the Public Trust Doctrine, and the California Coastal Act. Next slide. The Port Act outlines our governing legislation and directs the port to manage the bay and tidelands on behalf of the citizens of the state of California in a manner that promotes commerce, navigation, recreation, environmental stewardship, and fisheries while balancing the uses of these areas. Next slide, please. So why do we need a port master plan? Next slide. It's a quick transition. In addition to our 2 marine terminals, the port manages a large variety of visitor serving uses, such as parks, attractions, restaurants, and hotels, as well as many other amenities to draw visitors to the waterfront. And a port master plan helps us manage all of those diverse uses and activities, as well as guide future development on tidelands. Next slide. The first port master plan, click to advance the animation, please, thank you, was adopted in 1972, but after the passage of the Coastal Act in 1976, the Port of San Diego, along with 3 other ports, Port of LA, Port of Long Beach, and Port of Hueneme, was required to have the Coastal Commission certify our master plan. The Coastal Commission first certified our plan in 1981, and since that time, 40 amendments to the plan have occurred, mostly in response to individual projects that were not consistent with the plan. That's left us with a very inconsistent content in the document and a largely outdated plan. Next slide, please. The Port Master Plan update includes planning districts shown on this slide to allow us to advance planned improvements and development standards specific to each of the distinct areas around Port Tidelands. Next slide. Now for a very brief background on the PMPU. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes the major milestones for the PMPU effort, including the board's acceptance of a vision statement and guiding principles in 2014, followed by the acceptance of a framework report in 2015. And together, these 2 documents serve as the foundation for the contents of the Port Master Plan update, including goals, objectives, and policies that apply baywide, and planned improvements and development standards specific to each planning district. We released the first draft of this document, called the discussion draft, in April of 2019 for a 90-day review period. And we received a substantial amount of public comment, nearly 4,000 pages worth. And so we've recently released a revised draft of the PMPU to respond and address all of the feedback that was received. Next slide. And now turning to some of the highlights of the revised draft PMPU. The revised draft includes, let me just make sure, yes, we have the correct slide, includes topic-specific elements that carry forward goals, objectives, and policies that apply baywide. And one of those elements focuses on mobility. On this slide is the outline of the mobility elements, goals, and objectives. And at a high level, this element focuses on enhanced mobility options for efficient movement of people and goods. We also have a goal dedicated to how the mobility system on Tideland supports military operations. Goal 1 of this element promotes a more balanced transportation network for people traveling to and across Tidelands. It focuses on expanding accessible modes throughout Tidelands, including encouraging the development of curbside management and TDM strategies, improved transit connections, and an emphasis on the water mobility network, establishing a comprehensive mobility hub network and improving parking options. I also want to point out that the chapters in this plan are not intended to be standalone. So while the mobility element focuses on mobility throughout Port Tidelands, the environmental justice element also addresses access and mobility policy specific to disadvantaged communities, and the safety and resiliency and ecology elements include policies that promote the use of clean technology, such as electrification and shore power. Next slide, please. For the Port of San Diego, it is important that mobility emphasizes the water in addition to land. And on to the next slide. To show you how to use different components of the revised draft PMQ, how they work together, here's an overview of how the plan encourages the development of a mobility hub network. The graphic on the left shows general locations of mobility hubs along with existing or potential water-based transfer points. Chapter 4 of the document includes Bay-wide development standards, including a section on mobility hubs that include the specific development standards and requirements for each of the 3 types of hubs proposed in the revised draft. In Chapter 5, the planning districts include site-specific standards and planned improvements for each of the proposed hubs within a planning district. Next slide. Now this slide includes some examples of the plan's emphasis on creating water mobility options throughout San Diego Bay, such as requiring the port coordinate with regional agencies in the development of a comprehensive water-based transit network, as well as policies that encourage water-based transfer points, short-term public docking, and non-motorized watercraft launch points in planning districts. Next slide. This slide includes graphics from the Port's Harbor Drive 2.0 project. This concept was initially conceived as part of the early visioning stages of the Port Master Plan update effort, with the idea of creating a haul road to separate trucks from regular traffic in Barrio Logan National City and around the naval base. Essentially, this concept allows for a more organized configuration of the Harbor Drive right-of-way that will not only create more efficient connections for maritime cargo between the port's 2 terminals, but will also enhance pedestrian, bicycle, and transit connections throughout the industrial area of Harbor Drive, benefiting surrounding communities. Next slide. Another key component of the plan is the implementation of a bayfront circulator to provide connections from the Embarcadero Planning District, including the Convention Center and large waterfront attractions, over and around to Harbor Island and Shelter Island planning districts. The concept of the circulator is to connect to the mobility hubs also noted on this graphic. The alignment and plan stops for this circulator are some of the specific items staff of our respective agencies, as well as the staff from the City of San Diego and the airport, are closely coordinating to ensure alignment with airport connectivity efforts, and specifically the planned automated people mover. Next slide. Now this graphic depicts the potential relocation of Harbor Drive, or reallocation of Harbor Drive, which is one of the planned improvements within the Embarcadero Planning District. Today, when you look at Harbor Drive, there is a lot of asphalt and poorly configured parking areas immediately adjacent to the waterfront. So, as I'll describe this graphic, working our way east to west or from the top of the graphic towards the bottom where the water is, we plan to establish 2 vehicle lanes, create curbside management zones shown in the red blocks, make sure we reserve right-of-way for dedicated transit lanes shown in orange, along with a bikeway shown in the blue line. With the remaining area dedicated for increasing and enhancing public open space along the waterfront. Next slide. And one more click for the animation. This cross section illustrates how we can optimize this waterfront space for public realm, as well as continue support for transit, bike, and automobiles. Next slide, please. And one more, that was just the animation on that slide. Next slide. Thank you. And finally, this is just an illustration, but it helps to convey the port's vision to create the Embarcadero portion of Harbor Drive as the next great waterfront street, and our goal to create an exciting and interesting waterfront experience by improving and expanding public space along the waterfront. More specifically, in the foreground of this image is an area we refer to as the window to the bay, which the plan helps to establish by protecting views in this area, along with planned development of a public pier with public docking opportunities directly across from the iconic county waterfront park. Next slide. And to wrap up by quickly touching on next steps for the PMPU effort. We published, as I mentioned, very recently the revised draft PMPU. We put that on October 20th for a 4-week review period, which concludes on November 17th. That's next Tuesday. Then before the end of this year, tentatively scheduled for December 7th, we will have a PMPU workshop with the Board of Port Commissioners, during which staff will present a summary of all of the feedback we receive, then also seek any board direction needed for the revised draft PMPU. Our goal is to wrap up this draft of the document this calendar year so that next year, next slide please, we can focus on the completion of the CEQA process, with the target being the release of the draft program EIR next summer of 2021 and presentation of the final EIR for our board certification at the end of that year, with that being the big milestone event where staff will request the board's approval of the PMPU. And then when we're reserving the majority of the year 2022 for processing the PMPU with the Coastal Commission for their certification. Next slide. So although we do communicate regularly with staff, we want to make sure all agencies are aware of all updates on the PMPU. We do encourage people to sign up on our listserv to receive updates and notices for upcoming meetings and events. And that information's on this slide. Next slide, please. And we've also tried to make participating in this process as simple as possible. This slide lists the various methods for submitting comments, including a simple way to express support for the plan, which we're not shy in asking for at this stage of the process. And on to the very last slide, please. That concludes. Next slide. So this concludes my presentation. And we really appreciate your time today. And we are, Jason and I, along with Commissioner Bonelli, are available for any questions you may have for us. So thank you.
Thanks, Leslie, very much. I know you and I worked together over a decade, and to see this come together, it's really, really refreshing as a port user, as a port city, and as an active boater. There's lots to like in this for the whole region. Admiral Bonelli, did you want to say any wrap-up comments before we open it up to discussion?
No, staff has done a wonderful job. It's been a 6-year effort. What I'm heartened, I think my fellow commissioners are too, is besides the 6-year planning effort, it's been a 6-year public engagement effort. And I'm trying to prove that the port's a public agency that not only gets out there and interacts with our various constituency, but we listen to them and we adjust the plan based on what we hear. So I'm very proud of that.
Gary, you should be, on behalf of Coronado, where it's never too early for the pitchforks and torches to come out, at the first sign of issues related down by the Cays or also adjacent to the ferry landing, possible changes there. You guys engaged quickly in a proactive way. City meetings, obviously pre-COVID, public workshops. It was really fantastic to see how attentive you were to those concerns. I'm sure you've been the same way with other jurisdictions and other cities, and you're to be lauded for the amount of public input. I know you're still getting some emails from my residents, and I know those are becoming part of the record, but again, thank you for this presentation today. Any comments or questions from the public on this one?
I don't see any hands raised from the public.
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments from committee members? Go ahead, Jewel.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Excellent presentation. Really appreciate it. Can you tell me a little more about the Bayfront Circulator?
Absolutely. So in many of those graphics, we showed how we'll be reserving a portion of that right of way so that it could be for dedicated transit. And the idea, the concept is of a Bayfront Circulator to help more efficiently connect visitors and residents or workers along the entire Embarcadero area. Right now, we're technology agnostic. It could be initially a form of rubber reel. We hope to maybe coordinate with MTS on implementation. And ultimately, it could be an automated people mover or some sort of fixed rail system that just consistently goes back and forth along the Embarcadero.
Okay, well, thank you. Look forward to hearing more about that as it develops.
Yeah, it's exciting too in terms of connecting the convention center and the waterfront hotels to the airport and Harbor Island. So thank you and I will stay tuned with that from my MTS hat as well. Johanna, would you like to make some comments?
Yes, thanks. On behalf of the airport, I also just wanted to commend you for the work and thank you for the robust input and the communication process. So thanks again. Great work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joanna.
And any other member comments? All right, I'm chiming in with a couple here. Would you go back to, if you could, from the presentation, slide 12. Slide 12 is something that I made a note of, and I'm hoping we can get back to it if we can. Slide 12, that's 12. Okay, so the best parts of these are all things that make the Bay an active and important part of transportation. The water is very poorly used in our community when it comes to moving people. It's pretty good with freight though, but when you look at something like the San Francisco Ferry Building and you see the way they move people in San Francisco Bay, we have opportunities here in San Diego to do that too. The mobility hubs that were identified on the map are great. I'd love to see some of those mobility hubs on the military bases as well. And I know we have some buy-in both from the Point Loma military base as well as North Island interested in this. And of course, with the new Navy building right downtown, right on the water, there may be an opportunity to create some base-to-base service as well as something that the public and commuters can use. The paid public docking that came about in that was shown is absolutely beautiful. That overview shot with, you can scoot forward to that, the real pretty rendering that includes the new docks right in front of the county building, really said to me what San Diego Bay can and should be. You talked about San Diego's doorstep and that sort of thing. That really is awesome. Question in terms of timing. We've heard a lot about the Harbor Drive improvements for the truck traffic and that sort of thing over the last, almost 18 months now. Will that happen sooner than this master plan goes forward? Is that Harbor Drive improvement going to, like in design and construction phases? And how does it also interconnect with the bikeway? Because I know the Bayshore Bikeway has a project coming up on Harbor Drive very quickly.
Jason, would you like to respond to that one, or should I? And you
sure, we can tag team on this.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Chair Sankey. Jason Giffen here with the port. So Harbor Drive 2.0 is definitely on track to proceed ahead of schedule in terms of us, in terms of completing this port master plan update. We're partnering actually with Sandag and Caltrans. Caltrans is looking to take the lead on Harbor Drive, what we call Harbor Drive 2.0. And we're in the early stages. We've recently entered an MOU between Caltrans, Sandag, and the port to focus on how we're going to move forward implementing Harbor Drive 2.0. And when you start looking initially at Harbor Drive 2.0, there's a lot of good opportunities for implementing intelligent transportation systems, which frankly, initially don't require as much infrastructure improvements as some of the other projects you've spoken about today at the Transportation Committee. So we'll continue to be proceeding with that, with ultimate configuration happening down the road after environmental review and after we've secured, obviously.
So it's probably a year or 18 months away, give or take.
At least, yes, sir. And
yeah,
then
those things
perhaps
take a while.
I could ask Leslie perhaps to talk a little bit about the Bayshore Bikeway, if that was your follow-up question.
Yes, so
this incorporates it, yeah.
Yeah, and that's an important feature. We want to make sure that's kind of the last segment, the last hanging segment we want to make sure is completed. So absolutely, this effort, Harbor Drive 2.0, make sure that we're...
So that, because I know that's going to actually start construction soon. So that sooner than you're talking about with the schedule for Harbor Drive 2.0. To make sure the projects are complementary, and it sounds like they are. So great work. Again, Leslie, great working with you on several different projects, particularly related to Coronado, but and I really appreciate your presentation today. Admiral Bedelli, once again, the port hits it out of the park. Good job today. After the presentation, we asked for public comments. We did member comments. Are there any continued public comments for today's meeting?
Before we move on, Jennifer Mendoza does have her hand raised.
I did not see that. Thank you very much for bringing that to my attention. Jennifer, take it away.
Hi, sorry, Bill. So I just, with regard to the port project, I do want to, of course, study it a little bit more and follow it. But I just want to express a concern. And years ago, well, I worked downtown since 1982, and it was very dismaying when, between building some of the hotels along and the convention center, the hotel and the hotels next to the convention center, the bay was kind of walled off from pedestrian or bicycle traffic. And in order to, and then you have the trolley tracks separating downtown. And in order to walk from, one side to another, you had to walk, for at least 4, 5, 6 city blocks in each direction to get across. Unless, of course, you wanted to walk up all those convention center stairs and walk around the top and then try to find your way back down again. And especially with, I've also been a volunteer with the San Diego Symphony for the last 20 years. And, even though we haven't been able to use that new symphony structure yet, so I guess my caution is that we make sure that in all this expansion plans around the port, Seaport Village, Harbor Drive, that we not make that same mistake and wall off the bay, so that only tourists, so that it's only convenient for tourists to use it. That we keep street crossings, corridors, at great expense. That the bridge was built from Petco Park over to Embarcadero South. That's, I'm hoping that is going to be part of the port's plan too, is how do you get pedestrians across a very easily across a very busy Harbor Drive. So those are just some comments that I'm hoping to see in the port's plan as time goes on. And it looks like that goal is there and a lot of elements are there. But I'd like to see how that plan develops. So thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Gary, you'd want to comment on that? Or Leslie?
It's a very good point, just from a point of history too. When I first was working for an outfit called the Comprehensive Planning Organization back in the mid-70s, the executive director then, Hassan Nakrata, several times earlier, talked about walling off the bay. So it's, I think we're trying to address that in the Port Master Plan update. My big push has been, as we look to develop, redevelop, keep open space, especially on the San Diego National City Chula Vista side, as we give folks the opportunity to get down to the bay so they can actually put their toes in the water. So although this Port Master Plan is a land and water use public policy plan, as we get into the project level, the things we're looking at, the thing I'm insisting as people propose is the ability to touch the water.
Thank you. Leslie, anything to add?
Excellent points, Gary. The only thing I'd add on is that that is a very big concern of ours. In this revised draft, you'll see a number of development standards that we've introduced to help ensure not just streets are reconnected, but view corridors are maintained, that building setbacks and step backs are required, so that our new favorite word, to ensure porosity to the waterfront is maintained, visual and physically, so that it's easy to access. So that, to all of your points, Jennifer, we have tried in the revised draft to address and ensure that those things will be required.
Jennifer, does that kind of cover what you were thinking?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Of course, thanks for your comment. If you look at the Marriott auxiliary building redo that ended up creating that space between the Hyatt parking lot and the nice pedestrian plaza between those two buildings, that's obviously the direction you guys are headed, and that's an example of one project that hopefully will be reflected in some of the newer ones. And I can't wait to see what happens. So back to item 9. Any other continued public comments? And we're going to say, Francesca.
No, sorry. No, we don't have any other public comments.
Okay, thanks very much. With that, our next Transportation Committee meeting is scheduled for Friday, December 11th. Watch your email for information on that. We've completed today's agenda. We are adjourned. Thanks so much for joining us today.